The last thing I remembered was the sharp, blinding pain in my hip, a sudden betrayal by the laws of physics on my own back porch. Then came the soft, concerned face of my daughter, Sarah, hovering over me, her voice a distant echo. My son, Mark, was there too, his expression more annoyed than worried, already on the phone. Yes, an ambulance. He's 72. The world dissolved into a blurry sequence of sirens, gentle hands, and the prick of a needle in my arm. Just something to help with the pain, Dad, a voice had murmured. I surrendered to the cool, spreading numbness, trusting them. I always trusted them. I woke up to the smell of bleach and boiled cabbage. It was a scent so specific, so institutionally grim, that it bypassed memory and registered as a primal warning. My eyes fluttered open, struggling against a heavy, drugged grogginess. The ceiling was not the familiar textured plaster of my bedroom, nor the stark white of a hospital. It was a grid of acoustic tiles, stained with faint watermarks in the corners, like old, faded maps of forgotten islands. A thin, scratchy blanket lay over me, tucked in so tightly I felt pinned, a butterfly on a corkboard. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced the fog in my mind. I tried to sit up, but my body felt like a bag of wet sand. A dull ache radiated from my hip, a constant, throbbing reminder of the fall. But the greater pain was a profound sense of dislocation. Where was I? The room was small, painted a pale, lifeless yellow. A single window looked out onto a manicured lawn, unnaturally green, where a few elderly people shuffled along a paved path, their movements slow and disconnected. A metal-framed bed, a cheap laminate dresser, and a single armchair. It was furnished with the sterile impersonality of a place where people come to wait. I pushed the blanket away, my arms trembling with a weakness that felt unnatural. My clothes were gone. In their place, I wore a thin pair of pajamas that weren't mine. On the bedside table sat a plastic water pitcher, a cup, and a small paper cup containing 2 pills. This was not a hospital. Hospitals buzzed with a sense of urgent purpose. This place was quiet. It was the sound of silence itself, a heavy, suffocating blanket of resignation. A woman in blue scrubs bustled in, not a nurse's crisp uniform, but the softer, more casual attire of a caregiver. She had a bright, forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, good. You're awake, Michael. Did you have a nice rest?" Michael, not Mr. Connolly. The casual use of my first name was the first clear signal that my status had been altered. I was no longer a man, a business owner, a father. I was an inmate. Where am I? My voice was a dry rasp. What is this place? "You're at Green Valley Meadows, dear," she said, her voice dripping with practiced condescension. "It's your new home. Your children were so wonderful, getting everything arranged for you after your little accident. They just want you to be safe." The words hit me not like a wave, but like individual ice-cold stones. New home, arranged for you, safe. The world tilted, the bland yellow walls seeming to close in. My children, Mark and Sarah. They had done this. They had used my fall, my momentary vulnerability, as an excuse to discard me. The sedative wasn't for pain. It was for transport. I hadn't been rescued. I had been captured. "No," I croaked, the word barely audible. "No, there's been a mistake. I need to call my son." The woman's smile tightened. Now, Michael, let's not get agitated. Your children will visit soon. They left very specific instructions that you need to rest and acclimate. Doctor's orders." She held out the paper cup with the pills. "Time for your morning medication." I stared at the pills, 2 small white discs of control. Something inside me, a core of defiance I thought had softened with age, hardened into diamond. I was a victim of a coup. My life, my home, my autonomy, all seized while I slept. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that spread from my chest to my face. To be handled, managed, and disposed of like a piece of faulty furniture. I looked from the pills to her unwavering, placid face. This was my breaking point. The shock was already crystallizing into a cold, clear rage. They had underestimated me. They saw an old man who fell. They didn't see the man who had built a successful contracting business from nothing, who had stared down union bosses and navigated recessions, who had held his wife's hand as she slipped away and still found the strength to get up the next day. They had made a profound mistake. In that quiet, sterile room, under the gaze of a stranger who called me by my first name, I made a silent, solemn vow. I would not be acclimated. I would not be managed. I would get out of this place. And then I would find out exactly why this had happened, and there would be a reckoning. This was not my new home. It was a prison, and I had just become its most determined inmate. My quiet decision was made. The war had begun, and they didn't even know I had enlisted. The first few days were a lesson in calculated surrender. I quickly learned that resistance was futile and, more importantly, counterproductive. The first time I refused the pills, the cheerful caregiver's face clouded over, and she returned with a much larger, sterner-looking orderly. His presence was an unspoken threat. Arguing only earned me notations in a chart. Agitated, combative, confused. I saw the narrative they were building, the one my children had undoubtedly paid for. I was a confused old man who didn't know what was good for him. So I changed tactics. I swallowed the pills, which I soon realized were mild sedatives, designed to keep me docile and pliable. I would hide them under my tongue and spit them out in the bathroom when no one was looking. It was a small, secret act of rebellion that kept my mind clear. I learned to smile weakly, to nod, to appear cooperative. I became Michael, the sweet, slightly befuddled old man in room 21B. I let them underestimate me. It was the only weapon I had. This period of forced inactivity gave me something I hadn't had in years: time. Uninterrupted, agonizing time to think. As I lay in the too-short bed or sat in the hard-backed chair, staring at the impossibly green lawn, my life spooled out behind me like a reel of old film. I thought of Helen, my wife. What would she have made of this? Helen had been the heart of our family, but she had also been its backbone. She saw people with a clarity I often lacked, blinded as I was by a father's love. I remembered a conversation from years ago, shortly after Mark had joined the business. We were in the kitchen, the scent of her famous lasagna filling the air. "Be careful with him, Michael," she had said, her brow furrowed with a familiar worry. "He loves the results, but he doesn't respect the work. He sees the house you built, not the bricks you laid." I had dismissed it at the time. "He's young, honey. He's ambitious. That's a good thing." "It's not ambition," she had replied, stirring the sauce. "It's entitlement. There's a difference." Her words now echoed in the sterile silence of my room with the force of prophecy. Entitlement. That was the key. Mark had grown up comfortable, watching me build Michael Connolly and Sons Construction into a respected local firm. He saw the comfortable house, the paid-for college education, the new cars. He never saw the 16-hour days, the missed weekends, the nights spent hunched over blueprints, with worry eating a hole in my stomach. He saw the destination, not the journey. And Sarah? My sweet, gentle Sarah. She had always been the peacemaker, the one who hated conflict. Her defining trait was a desperate need to be liked, which often meant she flowed along the path of least resistance. Mark was a force of nature, a torrent of demands and desires. Sarah was the stream that diverted its course to accommodate him, avoiding the confrontation. I realized with a pang of guilt that I had enabled this. I had mistaken her passivity for kindness, her fear for gentleness. She wouldn't have orchestrated this betrayal, but she would have stood by and let it happen to keep the peace. Then there was Jessica, Mark's wife, the foil. She was cut from the same cloth as Mark, but with sharper edges. Her smiles were transactional, her compliments calculated. I remembered the last family dinner before my fall. She had been talking about their friend's new boat, her voice laced with a covetousness that was almost vulgar. "It must be nice," she'd said, looking directly at me, "to get to a point where you can just relax and let your money work for you." It wasn't a question. It was a prod, a suggestion that my time was over, that the fruits of my labor were ripe for someone else's picking. I had felt a chill then, but brushed it off as her typical crassness. Now I saw it for what it was, the laying of groundwork. They were testing the waters, seeing how I would react to the idea of being put out to pasture. My fall hadn't been the reason. It had been the opportunity. This reflection was not just an exercise in painful nostalgia. It was an investigation. I was piecing together the psychological puzzle of my own downfall, the greed, the entitlement, the weakness. It all clicked into place, forming a sickeningly clear picture. They didn't see me as their father anymore. They saw me as an obstacle, an asset to be liquidated. The full, horrifying scope of their plan began to dawn on me. This wasn't just about my safety. This was about my money, my house, my business, everything I had spent a lifetime building. They had put me in this cage to gain control of it all. The humiliation I felt earlier was now dwarfed by a towering, cold fury. This was not just an insult. It was theft on the grandest scale. My resolve, already firm, now solidified into something unbreakable. This was no longer just about getting my freedom back. It was about justice. It was about defending my life's work and the memory of the woman I had built it with. I stopped seeing myself as a prisoner and started seeing myself as a strategist, trapped behind enemy lines. The period of quiet observation was over. It was time to find a way to fight back. My mind, clear of the sedatives, began to churn, searching for a weakness in their fortress, a crack in the walls of Green Valley Meadows. I needed an ally, and I needed information. The real battle was about to begin. My first priority was to find an ally within the walls of my prison. I observed the staff with the careful eye of a field commander assessing terrain. Most were like the first woman, cheerful automatons going through the motions. Some were openly resentful, their faces etched with a permanent scowl. But there was one, a night nurse named Clara, who was different. Clara was younger than the others, perhaps in her late 20s, with tired eyes that held a spark of genuine empathy. She moved with a quiet efficiency, but she spoke to the residents, not at them. She would adjust a pillow with a gentle touch, listen patiently to a rambling story, and her smiles, though rare, were real. I saw her one night with Mr. Henderson from across the hall, a man lost in the fog of dementia who was crying softly. Clara didn't shush him or sedate him. She sat on the edge of his bed and held his hand until the tears subsided. In a place built on indifference, such a small act of kindness was a beacon. I decided to take a calculated risk. For a week, I made a point of being my most charming, lucid self whenever she was on duty. I feigned sleep during the day shifts, saving my energy for the nights. I would be awake when she made her rounds. I'd ask her about her day, about her studies. I'd overheard she was in nursing school. I shared stories of my late wife, Helen, painting a picture of the life I had before this place. I was not just an inmate. I was a person. I was building a bridge of trust, one small, carefully chosen brick at a time. Finally, one night, when the hallway was silent and the only sound was the distant hum of the floor polisher, I made my move. Clara came in to check my vitals. "You're looking much better, Michael," she said softly, wrapping the blood pressure cuff around my arm. "Your color is good." "Clara," I said, my voice low and urgent. "I'm not confused. I'm not sick, other than this hip. My children put me here under false pretenses. I am a prisoner." She froze, her fingers still on the cuff's valve. Her eyes darted toward the open door. "Michael, you shouldn't say things like that. People will misunderstand." "Please," I whispered, leaning forward. "I know you see what this place is. You're not like the others. I'm not asking you to break any major rules. I just need one small favor. I need to use a computer with internet access for 10 minutes. That's all." I saw the conflict in her face, fear warring with her innate decency. She was a student, likely working this thankless job to pay her tuition. Getting involved could cost her everything. "I can't," she said, shaking her head, but her voice lacked conviction. "I could lose my job, or worse." "They are stealing my life," I said, letting the raw, desperate truth of it show in my eyes. "Everything I worked for, my home, my business. They have it all, and I'm trapped here, powerless. All I'm asking for is a chance to fight back, a 10-minute chance." I held her gaze, refusing to look away. "Please, I have nowhere else to turn." Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. I could hear her breathing, the soft squeak of her rubber-soled shoes on the linoleum. I had laid my cards on the table. My fate, in that moment, was in her hands. She finally let out a long, slow breath and unwrapped the cuff from my arm. She glanced down the hall again, then back at me. "The nurse's station computer is logged off after midnight," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The supervisor is usually doing rounds on the third floor between 2 and 2:30. Be ready." She left without another word. Relief washed over me so intensely my hands started to shake. It was the first glimmer of hope, the first crack of light in a long, dark tunnel. At 5 minutes to 2, I slipped out of my bed. My hip screamed in protest, but I ignored it. Adrenaline was a powerful anesthetic. I crept to my door, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. The hallway was empty, bathed in the dim, yellow glow of the nightlights. I heard the distant rumble of the elevator and knew the supervisor was on her way up. It was now or never. Clara was at the nurse's station, pretending to organize charts. She didn't look at me as I shuffled past her, trying to look like a resident on a confused late-night wander. She had left the office door slightly ajar. I slipped inside. The office was tiny, cluttered with binders and medical supplies. On the desk was an old desktop computer. My hands trembled as I sat down and nudged the mouse. The screen flickered to life, showing a generic login screen. Clara appeared in the doorway. "Password is Sunflower1, she whispered, then vanished. I typed it in. The desktop loaded, an icon for a web browser beckoning me. I had 10 minutes to unravel my life. I went straight to my bank's website. My hands were clumsy on the unfamiliar keyboard, my mind racing. I still remembered my login details, a small miracle. I typed them in, held my breath, and hit enter. My checking account balance appeared on the screen. It was almost empty. A cold dread seeped into my bones. I clicked on the transaction history. The screen filled with a list of withdrawals and transfers, all dated within the last week, since I had been incarcerated. $10,000 here, $20,000 there, a $50,000 wire transfer to a title company. My blood ran cold. I knew what that was. He was buying something, or selling something. I clicked through my other accounts, my savings, my investment portfolio. All of it was being systematically drained. Large sums of money were being moved to an account I didn't recognize, an account in Mark's name. But the critical discovery, the one that turned my cold dread into white-hot rage, was deeper in the digital paper trail. I searched my email, which I hadn't checked in over a week. Buried in my inbox was a notification from the county court's electronic filing system. I clicked it open. It was a petition for conservatorship, filed by my son, Mark Connolly. Attached was a scanned doctor's evaluation, signed by a Dr. Alistair Finch, a name I'd never heard. I opened the document. It was a brutal, clinical assassination of my character and my mind. Advanced senile dementia. Incapable of managing his own financial affairs. Prone to violent outbursts. A danger to himself and others. It was all lies, a tapestry of grotesque, deliberate falsehoods, signed by a doctor I had never met, all designed to strip me of my legal rights and grant my son total control over my life and my assets. This was the weapon they had used to have me committed. This was the justification for the theft. It wasn't just greed. It was a meticulous, cold-blooded conspiracy. They hadn't just put me away. They had legally erased me. My breath hitched. I could hear my own blood roaring in my ears. This document was my death warrant and my salvation. It was the proof, the undeniable black and white evidence of their betrayal. I heard a soft cough from the doorway. Clara was there, her face pale. 2 minutes, she whispered. With shaking fingers, I found what I was looking for, a print to PDF option. I saved the court filing, complete with the fraudulent doctor's report, to the computer's desktop. Then I opened my email, attached the file, and sent it to a name I hadn't thought of in years, but who I knew I could trust. Arthur Davies. My old lawyer, retired mostly, but sharp as a tack and fiercely loyal. The subject line I wrote was simple. Urgent, Michael Connolly, I have been kidnapped. I hit send. Then I logged out of my accounts, deleted the PDF from the desktop, and cleared the browser history. I stood up, my body trembling with a mixture of rage and adrenaline. The pain in my hip was gone, replaced by a singular, burning purpose. I shuffled back to my room, my mind a maelstrom. The discovery of the fraudulent legal filing had changed everything. My mission was no longer just about escape. It was about dismantling the entire edifice of their lies. The pain of their betrayal was no longer a dull ache. It was a whetstone, sharpening my resolve to a razor's edge. I wasn't just fighting for my freedom. I was fighting for my name, my legacy, and my very existence. The game had changed. Now, I had evidence. The email to Arthur Davies was a message in a bottle thrown into a vast ocean. For 2 days, I heard nothing. The silence was agonizing. I played my part, the docile resident, but inside I was a coiled spring of tension. Every footstep in the hall made me jump. Every call over the PA system made my heart leap into my throat. Had my email been intercepted? Had Arthur dismissed it as the ramblings of a senile old man? The doubt was a corrosive acid, eating away at my newfound hope. During the day, Mark and Sarah visited. It was the first time I had seen them since waking up in this place. Seeing them walk into my room was a surreal experience. It was like watching actors play the part of my children. They brought flowers that smelled cloyingly sweet, their bright colors an insult to the grim reality of my situation. "Hi, Dad," Sarah said, her voice unnaturally bright. She avoided my eyes, busying herself with putting the flowers in the plastic water pitcher. Her guilt was a palpable thing, a heavy cloak she wore uncomfortably. Mark was all false sincerity. He pulled the armchair close to my bed and patted my hand. His touch felt like a spider crawling on my skin. "How are you feeling, Dad? Are they taking good care of you here?" I looked into his eyes, searching for any flicker of remorse, any sign of the son I had raised. I found nothing. Only a cool, appraising confidence, the arrogance of a man who believes he has won. It took every ounce of my self-control to not lunge at him. "It's quiet," I said, letting my voice sound weak and reedy. I let my gaze drift unfocused toward the window. "The food is soft." "That's good, Dad. That's good," Mark said, relief evident in his voice. He thought I was fading, that the drugs and the environment were doing their work. "Jessica sends her love. She's busy with the decorators for the new house. You know how it is." The new house, the $50,000 wire transfer. The pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. My money, my life savings, being spent on fabric swatches and paint colors for a house I would never see. Rage, pure and hot, exploded like a volcano in my chest, and for a second, I thought I would lose control. I squeezed the thin blanket in my fists, my knuckles turning white. I had to hold on. I had to maintain the illusion. "That's nice," I mumbled. "Tell her." "Hello." Sarah finally looked at me, her eyes welling with tears. "We're doing this for you, Daddy," she whispered. "We just want you to be safe." "I know, sweetie," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "You're good kids." Their visit was a form of torture, but it was also fuel. Their condescension, their transparent lies, their complete lack of guilt. It all reinforced the necessity of my secret war. They left after 20 minutes, promising to be back soon, leaving me in the suffocating silence of my room with the scent of their treacherous flowers. That night, my prayers were answered. A new face appeared at my door, a man in a crisp suit, looking profoundly out of place in the dreary hallway of Green Valley Meadows. He was tall and thin, with a shock of white hair and eyes that were still as sharp and intelligent as I remembered. "Arthur," I breathed, relief flooding through me. "Michael," he said, his voice a low rumble. He stepped inside and closed the door firmly behind him. "I got your email. I've been making some calls. It took me 2 days to get cleared to see you. They have you locked down tight. Your son is listed as your sole legal guardian on a provisional conservatorship." He pulled the chair to my bedside, his presence radiating a calm, professional authority that was the antithesis of this place. "I've reviewed the file you sent. The doctor's report from this Finch character. It's a work of fiction. I also did a quick check on Dr. Alistair Finch. He had his medical license suspended 2 years ago for prescription fraud. He has no legal standing to make any medical evaluation." The information hit me with the force of a physical blow. They hadn't just found a corrupt doctor. They had used a disgraced one. The sloppiness of it, the sheer arrogance, was breathtaking. "So what does that mean?" I asked, my voice trembling with a new fierce hope. It means the entire basis for your confinement is fraudulent, Arthur said, his expression grim. It means your son has committed perjury and fraud upon the court. This is not just a family squabble, Michael. This is a serious crime. He opened his briefcase and took out a sheaf of papers. I've also been busy on another front. I took the liberty of contacting my forensic accountant. He's already started looking into the bank activity you mentioned. Mark has been a very busy boy. He's been transferring funds into a personal holding company he set up 3 weeks ago. He's liquidated a significant portion of your stock portfolio. And that $50,000 payment? It was a down payment on a 7-bedroom house in the most expensive part of town. He and his wife were planning on closing next week. Arthur paused, letting the weight of the information sink in. He wasn't just trying to control your assets, Michael. He was trying to liquidate them, to steal everything, lock, stock, and barrel, and leave you here to rot. The clinical, legal language confirmed my deepest fears. This was a hostile takeover of my life. So, what do we do? I asked, my mind racing. How do we fight this? We don't just fight it, Arthur said, a predatory gleam in his eye. We annihilate it. The court has scheduled a formal hearing in 1 week to make the conservatorship permanent. Your son and his lawyer will walk into that courtroom, expecting to face a confused, sedated old man, if they even bother to bring you at all. They will be utterly unprepared for what's coming. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Here is the plan. You will continue to play your part. You are confused. You are docile. You are fading. Do not give them any reason to suspect that you are aware of what's happening. The element of surprise is our greatest weapon. My team and I will spend the next week gathering every piece of evidence we can find. Financial records, the truth about Dr. Finch, sworn affidavits. We are going to build a case so ironclad that by the time we are done, your son will be lucky to avoid a jail sentence. And Clara? I asked, a pang of worry for the young nurse who had risked so much for me. The nurse who helped me, she can't get in trouble. I've already thought of that, Arthur said. I will need to speak with her. We will need her testimony about your state of mind here. I will represent her pro bono and ensure she has full whistleblower protection. Her testimony will be crucial. She will be a hero in this story, not a casualty. Can you get a message to her? I nodded. I can. Arthur stood up, placing a hand on my shoulder. 1 more week, Michael. You have to hold on for 1 more week. Be the meekest sheep in the flock. Let the wolves get comfortable. Because next week in that courtroom, the shepherd is coming back, and he's going to be furious. He left as quietly as he had arrived, a phantom of justice in a world of despair. For the first time since waking up in this nightmare, I felt a sense of power. The despair was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I had my allies, I had my evidence, and I had my strategy. I was no longer just surviving, I was hunting. All I had to do was wear my sheep's clothing for a little while longer. The thought brought a grim smile to my face. The wolves had no idea the trap was about to be sprung. The next 7 days were the longest of my life. Living a lie is an exhausting, soul-crushing endeavor. I had to consciously slow my movements, dull my eyes, and slur my words just enough to be convincing. Every interaction was a performance. When the caregiver spoke to me in that infuriatingly slow, high-pitched voice reserved for toddlers and the infirm, I would nod blankly. When they brought my meals, I would eat slowly, occasionally spilling a little on my pajamas to complete the picture of incompetence. My only solace was my secret communication with Clara. I passed her a folded note during a late-night check-in, containing Arthur's name and number. She paled when she read it, but she tucked it into her pocket with a determined nod. 2 nights later, she came into my room, her face a mixture of fear and excitement. I spoke to him, she whispered, while pretending to check the IV stand that was, thankfully, no longer attached to me. Mr. Davies, he's incredible. He explained everything. He said I'm protected. He's taking a formal deposition from me tomorrow. She looked at me, her eyes shining. We're going to get you out of here, Michael. Her courage was a profound gift. This young woman with so much to lose was standing up to my family, to the system, all for a man she barely knew. Her belief in me bolstered my own. We were a tiny conspiracy of 2 within these walls, fighting a silent battle against the institution that held me captive. Mark and Jessica visited again, this time together. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, swept into the room like a minor royal, her nose wrinkled in distaste at the smell of antiseptic. She didn't even try to hide her contempt for the place. "Honestly, Mark," she said, not even looking at me, "it's clean, I suppose, but it's so depressing. Are you sure this is the best they have?" "It's the best for his level of care, honey," Mark said smoothly, giving me a patronizing wink, as if I were a child who couldn't understand them. "And it's secure. That's the main thing. Secure. A prison." Jessica walked over to the window, staring out at the grim little garden. "Well, as long as he's settled. The closing on the new house is Tuesday. I can't wait to get out of that cramped condo. We'll finally have room to breathe, and the boys will have a proper yard to play in." They were talking about their new life, purchased with my life savings, right in front of me. They were discussing the spoils of a war they thought they had already won. The audacity was staggering. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a particularly villainous scene in a movie. It was hard to believe these people were my family. The son I had taught to ride a bike, the woman he had chosen to marry. They had become monsters, hollowed out by greed. I made a soft, nonsensical noise, and they both turned to look at me. I let my head loll to the side slightly, my eyes unfocused. "See?" Mark said to Jessica in a low voice. "He's not really here anymore. It's for the best. This is a kindness." A kindness. The word hung in the air, obscene and twisted. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them I heard every word, that I saw them for the craven thieves they were, but I held my tongue. I let them have their moment of hubris. Arthur's words echoed in my mind, "Let the wolves get comfortable." And so I did. I was the ghost at their feast, the silent witness to their crimes, and my silence was my most powerful weapon. The day of the court hearing arrived. It dawned gray and overcast, the sky the color of dirty dishwater. A perfect day for a reckoning. 2 orderlies came for me in the morning. They had me shower and dress in a pair of ill-fitting slacks and a faded polo shirt from a donation bin. They were dressing a prop for the stage. "You have a little field trip today, Michael," one of them said cheerfully. "Going to see a judge." They led me to a transport van, the kind with no handles on the inside of the back doors. As we drove, I looked out the window at the world I had been stolen from. The familiar streets of my town, the coffee shop I used to frequent, the park where I walked with Helen. It all seemed impossibly distant, a life that belonged to someone else. We arrived at the county courthouse, a stern, neoclassical building with pillars and imposing stone steps. The orderlies walked me through a side entrance, down a series of drab hallways, and into the courtroom. It was smaller than I expected. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and floor wax. Mark and Sarah were already there, sitting at a table with a slick-looking lawyer in a suit that was too shiny. Mark gave me a brief, dismissive nod, then turned back to confer with his lawyer. He was radiating confidence. He looked every bit the concerned son, reluctantly taking on the heavy burden of his father's care. Sarah wouldn't look at me at all. She sat stiffly in her chair, her hands clenched in her lap, her face pale and drawn. She looked like someone waiting for a diagnosis. The orderlies directed me to a chair at the opposite table. It was empty. For a terrifying moment, I thought Arthur hadn't come, that the whole plan was a fantasy I had concocted in my drugged mind. My heart hammered against my ribs. Then the courtroom doors opened, and Arthur Davies walked in. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by a sharp-looking younger woman I assumed was from his firm, and a man carrying a heavy briefcase who had the intense, focused look of a forensic accountant. Arthur strode directly to my table and placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Morning, Michael," he said, his voice calm and strong. "Ready to get your life back?" I just nodded, unable to speak. I saw Mark watch Arthur's entrance, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. He leaned over and whispered something to his lawyer, who glanced at us, a smug little smile playing on his lips. They saw an old, small-time lawyer, probably a friend of the family, here to make a token, sentimental plea. They had no idea of the artillery we were about to unleash. The judge entered, a stern-faced woman with tired eyes named Judge Eleanor Vance. "All rise." We stood, then sat. The proceedings began. Mark's lawyer, a Mr. Sterling, stood up. His voice was smooth as oil. Your Honor, we are here today to formalize the conservatorship of my client's father, Mr. Michael Connolly. It is a sad duty, but a necessary one. As the submitted medical evaluation from Dr. Finch attests, Mr. Connolly is suffering from advanced dementia. He is no longer capable of caring for himself or managing his complex financial affairs. My client, his son Mark Connolly, is prepared to step in and assume this responsibility to ensure his father's safety and the preservation of the estate he worked so hard to build. It was a masterful performance. He painted Mark as a hero, a dutiful son making a heartbreaking choice. Judge Vance looked over her glasses at me. I hunched my shoulders and looked down at my hands, playing my part to perfection. Mr. Davies, the judge said, her tone weary, as if she had seen this sad play 100 times before. Do you have any response? Arthur stood up slowly. The air in the room crackled with anticipation. The show was about to begin. Yes, Your Honor. I have a great deal of response, Arthur began, his voice filling the room. The petitioner, Mr. Mark Connolly, has presented this court with a compelling work of fiction, a tragedy in 2 acts. Act 1, a loving son, worried about his declining father. Act 2, the son reluctantly steps in to save the father from himself. It's a moving story. The only problem is, every single word of it is a lie. A gasp came from Sarah. Mark's face hardened, his confident smirk faltering for the first time. His lawyer, Sterling, shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is being inflammatory and making baseless accusations. Sit down, Mr. Sterling, Judge Vance said, her eyes now fixed on Arthur. You've had your say. Let's hear what Mr. Davies has to prove his rather dramatic assertion. Proceed, counsel. Arthur gave a slight nod. Thank you, Your Honor. The petitioner's entire case rests upon the medical evaluation signed by a Dr. Alastair Finch, an evaluation that describes my client as confused, aggressive, and mentally incompetent. He paused, letting the statement hang in the air. I'd like to call your attention to Exhibit A. He nodded to his young associate, who handed a document to the bailiff, who in turn passed it to the judge. That, Your Honor, is a certified copy of the State Medical Board's ruling from 2 years ago, permanently revoking Alastair Finch's license to practice medicine for felony prescription fraud. The man whose expert medical opinion forms the basis of this entire proceeding is not a doctor. He is a disgraced criminal, and his evaluation is legally and ethically worthless. The courtroom was utterly silent. Judge Vance stared at the document, her expression turning from weariness to cold fury. She looked over her glasses at Mark and his lawyer. The smugness had evaporated from Sterling's face, replaced by a sickly, pale shock. Mark was staring at Arthur, his mouth slightly agape, his face a mask of disbelief. Furthermore, Arthur continued, his voice like rolling thunder, my client, Mr. Michael Connolly, has never met this Dr. Finch. He has never been evaluated by him. The report is not just incompetent, it is a complete fabrication, a fraud perpetrated upon this court. He turned to me. Michael, he said, his voice now gentle, would you please tell the court, in your own words, what happened to you on the day you were taken to Green Valley Meadows? This was it, the moment of my unveiling. I took a deep breath, straightened my back, and lifted my head. I looked directly at Judge Vance, my mind clear and sharp. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady and strong, betraying none of the weakness I had feigned for weeks. I fell on my back porch. I hurt my hip. My son and daughter arrived. I was told I was being given something for the pain. The next thing I knew, I woke up in a nursing home, a prisoner. I have been held there against my will for the past 10 days, forcibly medicated with sedatives to keep me confused and compliant, based on a document I now know to be a lie. The transformation was stunning. The shift from the slumped, confused old man to the articulate, furious victim was a coup de théâtre. A wave of murmurs rippled through the small public gallery. Sarah let out a strangled sob and buried her face in her hands. Mark was on his feet, his face crimson with rage. He's lying. He's confused. This is one of his delusions. He's a manipulative old man. Mr. Connolly, you will sit down and be silent, or I will have you removed, Judge Vance snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. Her gaze was fixed on Mark, and it was utterly glacial. "You are in a great deal of trouble here." The power in the room had shifted completely. It was a tangible thing, a massive transfer of weight from their side of the scale to mine. The confident predators had suddenly become the cornered prey. The silence that followed the judge's outburst was thick and suffocating. It was the silence of their world collapsing. "But we are not done, Your Honor," Arthur said into the stillness, his voice merciless. "The fraud does not end there. This was not about my client's health. It was about his money." He gestured to the accountant, who stood and approached the bench with a thick binder. "This is Mr. Peterson, a forensic accountant. He has spent the last week examining my client's finances. What he has uncovered is not a preservation of the estate, but a systematic, high-speed looting." Arthur began to calmly and methodically lay out the evidence: the creation of the holding company, the liquidation of stocks at a loss, the wire transfers, the down payment on the multi-million-dollar home. With each new revelation, presented with cold, hard numbers on spreadsheets handed to the judge, Mark seemed to shrink in his chair. The color drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, sweaty gray. His lawyer, Sterling, was frantically whispering to him, but Mark wasn't listening. He was staring at me, his eyes wide, with a horrified understanding. He finally realized that the sheep he had led to the slaughter was, in fact, a wolf in disguise. The final piece of evidence was the deposition from Clara. Arthur read excerpts aloud, her testimony about my lucidity, my desperation, her observations of the staff being instructed to keep me medicated and isolated. She described my children's visits, how they spoke down to me, how they discussed their new house in my presence, believing I was too far gone to understand. When Arthur finished reading, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was like a slab of granite had fallen between us all. Every eye was on my son, Mark. He sat frozen, his grand betrayal laid bare for the world to see, dissected and displayed under the cold, sterile lights of the law. Judge Vance slowly removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She looked at Mark with an expression of profound disgust. "Mr. Connolly," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "do you have anything to say for yourself in the face of this mountain of evidence?" That was the moment the antagonist's composure finally, completely shattered. Mark shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His face was a grotesque mask of fury and panic. All pretense of the concerned son, of the respectable businessman, was gone. What was left was raw, ugly entitlement. "It was my money," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "It was supposed to be my money. He was never going to give it up. He's a selfish old man, sitting on a fortune while his own family struggles." His lawyer, Sterling, grabbed his arm, trying to pull him down. "Mark, for God's sake, be quiet." But Mark was beyond reason. He ripped his arm away and pointed a trembling finger at me. "He had it coming. All those years I worked for him. I built that business with him. And for what? A measly salary. He owed me. He owed us." The confession, screamed in the sanctified quiet of a courtroom, was more damning than any of Arthur's evidence. He had just admitted to motive, to intent, to the blackness in his own heart. Sarah was openly weeping now, her shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. "I see," Judge Vance said, her voice like ice. "So you committed fraud, perjury, and what amounts to kidnapping and false imprisonment, all because you felt you were entitled to your father's property before he was dead. Is that the long and short of it, Mr. Connolly?" The question hung in the air, a final, brutal indictment. Mark's rage suddenly collapsed, imploding into a desperate, pathetic panic. He looked around the room, at the judge's cold face, at Arthur's grim satisfaction, at his sister's shame, and finally, at me. His expression crumpled. "Dad," he pleaded, his voice suddenly small, a boy's voice. "Dad, please, tell them to stop. It was a mistake. We can fix this. I didn't mean for it to go this far." I looked at my son, the man who had left me to rot in a sterile room, who had stolen my name and my fortune, who had just screamed that I had it coming, and I felt nothing. The space inside me where my love for him had once lived was now a cold, empty void. It was a desolate freedom. I met his pleading gaze and gave a slow, deliberate shake of my head. No words were necessary. The door was closed. "This hearing is concluded," Judge Vance announced, her voice ringing with authority. She struck her gavel once, the sound like a gunshot in the tense silence. "The petition for conservatorship is denied with extreme prejudice. The provisional order is vacated, effective immediately. Mr. Michael Connolly's full rights and legal autonomy are hereby restored." She wasn't finished. Her gaze fell upon Mark like a physical weight. "However, this matter is far from over. Based on the evidence and the in-court confession I have heard today, I am referring this entire case to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal investigation. The charges will likely include, but are not limited to, perjury, conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and theft." She looked at the bailiff standing by the wall. "Bailiff, take Mr. Mark Connolly into custody. He is a flight risk and a danger to the community." Two uniformed officers moved toward Mark. The reality of his situation finally crashed down on him. "No!" he screamed, stumbling backward. "You can't do this, Jessica, the house, no!" He fought them, a wild, panicked animal caught in a trap. It was a short, undignified struggle. The bailiffs were professional and efficient. They wrenched his arms behind his back, the click of the handcuffs echoing in the silent room, the final humiliation. They led him away, still babbling about the house, about his wife, his pleas turning to incoherent sobs. The last I saw of him was the back of his head as he was pushed through the doors of the courtroom he had entered with such arrogance only an hour before. The room was still. His lawyer, Sterling, stood frozen, his face ashen, looking at the closing doors as if he had just witnessed a ghost. Sarah was a crumpled heap in her chair. I remained seated, my hands resting on the table in front of me. I had not gloated. I had not raised my voice. I had simply stood my ground, spoken my truth, and watched the edifice of his lies crumble under its own weight. My victory wasn't loud or triumphant. It was quiet, absolute, and devastating. I had my life back, and in that moment, that was all that mattered. As the judge left the bench and the courtroom began to clear, a profound, bone-deep exhaustion washed over me. The adrenaline that had sustained me for weeks drained away, leaving a hollow ache in its place. Arthur placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm and grounding. "It's over, Michael," he said softly. "You're free." I looked at him, and for the first time, I felt the sting of tears in my own eyes. They weren't tears of sadness or anger, but of immense, overwhelming relief. I nodded, the simple gesture carrying the weight of my entire ordeal. "Thank you, Arthur. Thank you." Clara, who had been sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom, came forward. Her face was pale, but she was smiling. "I'm so glad, Michael," she said. I stood up, my hip protesting, and pulled her into a hug. "You saved my life, Clara," I whispered. "I'll never forget it." "You saved your own life," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I just opened a door." Across the room, Sarah finally gathered herself. She rose unsteadily, her face streaked with tears, and took a hesitant step toward me. Arthur moved slightly, as if to block her, but I put a hand on his arm. "Dad," she began, her voice a raw whisper. "I'm so sorry, I just went along. Mark can be so—" She trailed off, her words dissolving into a fresh wave of sobs. I looked at my daughter, my gentle, weak daughter, who had stood by and watched as her brother tried to destroy me. There was no hatred in my heart for her, only a deep, profound sadness. She was a casualty of her own character, a victim of her inability to stand up for what was right. "I know, Sarah," I said, my voice flat and tired. "You just went along. That's the problem." I couldn't offer her forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever. The trust was shattered, ground into dust. "Go home, Sarah. I need time." She flinched as if I had struck her. She gave a small, defeated nod, turned, and walked away, a lonely figure disappearing out of the courtroom and, for now, out of my life. The aftermath was a blur of legal formalities. Arthur handled everything, shielding me from the worst of it. Mark was formally charged and released on a bail so high that it required Jessica to put up their condo as collateral. The purchase of their dream house was dead, the down payment seized as evidence of fraudulent activity. The story hit the local news, a minor scandal about a prominent local businessman's son arrested for fraud and elder abuse. The name Connolly, which I had worked my entire life to make synonymous with integrity and quality, was now dragged through the mud. The legal consequences for Mark were severe. Facing a mountain of evidence and my own damning testimony, he eventually took a plea deal to avoid a longer sentence. He was convicted of felony fraud and sentenced to 3 to 5 years in state prison. His life, as he knew it, was over. His law license was forfeit. His reputation was destroyed. Jessica, I later learned, filed for divorce within a month of his sentencing, unwilling to be tied to a failure. She took the children and moved back to her home state, vanishing from the landscape of my life. A week after the hearing, I was sitting in my own armchair in my own living room, a cup of real coffee in my hands. The house was silent, filled with the ghosts of the life I had built. Every corner held a memory of Helen, of raising my children, of happier times. The first few days back were disorienting. I felt like a stranger in my own home, a visitor from another life. My phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was from the state correctional facility. I hesitated, then answered. "This is a collect call from an inmate at the Northwood Correctional Facility," a recorded voice said. "From Mark Connolly. Do you accept the charges?" I almost hung up, but a part of me needed to hear it. I pressed one. "Dad?" Mark's voice came over the line, thin and distorted. "Dad, are you there?" "I'm here, Mark," I said. I'm sorry," he stammered. The words sounded foreign in his mouth. "I know it's too late. I know I messed everything up. I had to tell you. I'm sorry." He sounded broken, defeated. The arrogance was gone, scoured away by the harsh reality of his consequences. He was no longer the predator, but a man in a cage of his own making. I listened, waiting for the catharsis, for a feeling of pity or a surge of anger. But there was only emptiness. He had apologized, but the apology couldn't rebuild the city he had burned to the ground. "Why, Mark?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for weeks. "Why did you do it?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the clamor of the prison in the background. "I don't know," he finally said, his voice thick with a self-pity I found revolting. "I always felt like I was living in your shadow. I wanted something that was mine. I got lost. I thought it was what I was supposed to do. Take charge." He didn't get it. He still didn't truly understand the depth of his betrayal. It wasn't about money. It was about love and trust and the sacred bond between a father and a son. He had desecrated all of it. "Goodbye, Mark," I said, and I gently hung up the phone. I blocked the number. That door was now locked for good. The final plea had been made, and it had changed nothing. The past was the past. It was time to focus on the future. Months have passed since that day in court. The autumn leaves have fallen, and the first snow of winter dusts the ground outside my window. My life has settled into a new, quiet rhythm. The business, which had floundered under Mark's brief, disastrous tenure, is slowly being rebuilt. I hired a new manager, a young, hungry woman who reminds me of myself 50 years ago. I go into the office a few days a week, more as a consultant, a gray-haired eminence. The work gives me purpose. Arthur Davies and I have become close friends. We have dinner once a week. We talk about politics, about old times, about the strange turns life takes. His loyalty was a lifeline in my darkest hour, a reminder that integrity still exists in the world. And Clara. I paid off the remainder of her student loans. It was a small gesture, but one I insisted on. She finished her nursing degree with top honors and now works in the pediatric wing of the main hospital. She sends me pictures of the children she helps. She brings a light into the world that it desperately needs. She calls me every Sunday just to check in. In a strange way, she has become more of a child to me than my own children ever were. I haven't spoken to Sarah. She sends letters, long, rambling apologies filled with regret. I read them, and I file them away. I don't know if I will ever be able to let her back into my life. Forgiveness is a complex, difficult landscape, and I'm not ready to travel it yet. The wound is too deep. Trust, once shattered, is a mosaic that can never be made whole again. You can see the cracks forever. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I sit here in my chair, the one Helen and I picked out together, and I reflect on it all. I think about how easily a life can be upended, how quickly the people you love most can become strangers. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife, but in its wake, it revealed a strength I didn't know I possessed. It forced me to fight, not just for my assets, but for my identity, for my right to exist as the man I have always been. I was pushed to the very edge, stripped of everything I thought defined me, my freedom, my name, my role as a father. And in that empty space, I found the core of myself, a man who would not be erased, a man who would not surrender. They thought they were putting an old man in a cage, but they forged a weapon instead. My son's greed was a terrible, destructive force. It cost him his freedom, his family, his future. It cost me a son. But what I've learned is that family is not just about blood. It is about trust. It is about loyalty. It is about showing up when the darkness falls. My true family, in the end, was an old lawyer and a young nurse who saw a man in need and refused to look away. The path to this peace was paved with pain and humiliation, but it has led me here, to this quiet room, to this new chapter of my life. I am a victor, but my victory is a somber one. I won back my life, but I lost a part of my past forever. And the ultimate lesson, the one I carry with me every day, is a simple, hard-won truth. You must never, ever let anyone else write the final chapter of your story. You are the author, right up until the very end.